text. Next, more useful for our purpose, a manual of materia medica, now in the Timurid era, in the 14th century, the Ikhtiyarat Badi'i. I mentioned it already with the illustrations on these Mercury jugs. Here we find quite a substantial entry for Zibak, with one page, about 1.5 page article on the use of mercury. Interestingly, here we find also an alternative name for mercury, Imād, which is very close to what we heard in the first paper, the shuayin. I mean the mercury water, no, silver water, sorry. Silver water is exactly the same in Persian Imād. If there is any relationship to that, I don't know. We know it also from hydrargyron, Greek. Maybe it's rather graphical description of what you see, and so it could be independent. On the other side, it may well be have been imported. I mean, the thing with the name could have been important as well. Now, now I come to the final topic. It's the question of syphilis in Asia and its treatment. At the end of the 15th century, a large corpus of medical writings in the Persian language existed, and all parts of medicine were covered by this literature. On the other side, Arabic works were still in use, and for instance, Ibn Sina's Qanun was not yet translated into Persian, and so it was still used by the educated scholars. Now, the first mention, as it seems, of syphilis in Asia is found in a general work on medicine, the Khulasah-i tajarib, which was finished 1501. That's very early if we compare it to other parts of Asia. And what you see here is the beginning of the treaty on syphilis in this book. It is primarily called the Armenian grain, so indicating that it was believed that this disease came from Armenia. This would mean it spread over Asia Minor from Constantinople, which certainly was hit by the plague, and came maybe to the Black Sea coast to Armenia, and from there to Iran and the coast of the Caspian Sea. And there is an alternative. The author says, but in Khurasan, in the east of Iran, it was called Bileye Farang, the smallpox of the French. So French literally means, Farang means French, but is usually used as a general term for Europeans. And it is also mentioned in the text as atashak. This means, this is a diminutive and means a small fire, referring to the first symptom of syphilis, as it is stated in the text. Now, the author goes on now to first explain the different kinds of this disease, the symptoms, and then the treatment. It starts with diet, prescription, what to eat, and goes on to ointments. But finally, it seems that he had the strategy of using more and more heavy artillery against the disease. And at the end of his treaty, he mentions Ma'jūn Imād, a elucidary of mercury. Now, in the text which is edited of this work, this is the only remark. There is no recipe about, there are no recipes how to do it, but the entire article in this general work is repeated in the first monograph on syphilis, written about 60 years later. And there, in this quotation, in the section quoted by and ascribed to Bahāʻ al-Dawlah, it is a recipe is given, and it is said that it has to be 10 dirhams. This dirham is about 3 grams of mercury, 10 dirhams of mercury, 5 dirhams of a substance called potent powder, which is a mixture of ginger, pepper, and henna. Consisting of cinnamon, fennel, and lentiscus. Finally, 2 dirhams of each henna, pepper, and ginger. This means mercury was almost 50% of the substance. So it's a very high dose. The dose is said to be the size of a pea. So something like that. Now, in a comment of this later author who quotes this passage, written by Imād, says that this pill was known in Constantinople, Europe, India, and elsewhere. Now, I turn to the first Persian monograph on syphilis. This is the Risalah-i atashak, the epistle on syphilis, or on small fire, one could say, little fire. And it was written by a medical doctor, Maḥmūd Shīrāzī, who worked at the court of Shah Tahmasp, the great emperor of the Safavid dynasty, and what it seems his physician, but he was sent to Mashhad, the great pilgrimage center in eastern Iran, and there he wrote this monograph on syphilis. To write monographs on single diseases has a long tradition in Islamic medicine. Already Rāzī in the 9th and 10th century wrote a work on smallpox and measles, very famous book, translated into Latin and so on. And our author, Imād wrote several monographs, one of the Chinese herb, one of opium, which was mentioned before, and yes. Now, at the beginning of his book, Imād insists on the fact that syphilis did not exist in former times, because it was not mentioned by older writers. Then he goes on to criticize his predecessors, as is usual in such scientific works, and that he is the only person capable of writing on this subject properly. And then he gives explanations of the names. There are Bileye Farang, European smallpox, and Armenian sore, so again is mentioned. And he says because it appeared on Iranian territory first in Armenia. Now, what I have on my handout is a list of recipes of 14 recipes, which he lists in the center of his book. And it seems that he wanted to make a kind of catalogue of all known medicines against it. Some of them are explicitly declared as being of European origin, and some are declared, in some cases he says that they are his own accomplishment. Now, the most striking feature in these recipes is the high number of substances and the great variability in composition. All the more Astonishing is the fact that the only substance common to all recipes is mercury. In one kind as killed mercury, in others as pure mercury. However, it's difficult to judge if in these compositions other ingredients were capable of transforming mercury into compounds. This would be a work to be done, and however, this is not mentioned in the text. The quantities are not indicated in our prescriptions. However, as you see here, the numbers, I think it should be visible, indicating the number of dirhams in the prescription are written between the lines. And it's difficult to judge. I mean, this is very fragile in manuscript transmission. So I'm not sure if these numbers which I give on my list are original or later additions, or if the cases where I have no numbers, if they get lost in the manuscript edition. So this would really be the duty of a critical edition of the text, of this text which exists in many manuscripts. Now I come to the end, an outlook on later time. First, as I said, the first monograph was copied again and again, and it was commented on. So as you see here, a huge commentary, I mean, more text than more commentary than text in a manuscript, in the margin, in the broad margins of this probably late, maybe 18th century manuscript, I'm not sure. There are many more of this kind. This would be a source of the use